Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
It is true what the man said. This is Meanwhile Here on Earth. I am your host, Peter Robbins, and it's great to be back with you guys. We broadcast this show, as many of you know, Monday nights, 7 to 9 Eastern Standard Time, and you can always find it at KGRA-DB, that's KGRA, digitalbroadcasting.com. Just click on the icon at the top of the page that says live stream, and here you are. It's a beautiful early evening here in central New York State, where the weather is the envy of many of you. Low 80s during the day, some rain, 60s at night, and that ain't bad in this crazy heating up world. Tonight's guest, I am really glad to be bringing back for a second time, one of the most uniquely creative people that I've ever met, and almost needless to say, there is a tie-in to the UFO subject. Doug Auld was born in Queens, New York, like me, and Chris Walken, and Paul Simon, and many other luminaries, but spent most of his childhood in New Jersey. He grew up with a love and fascination with nature and wildlife, all things mechanical, and the subject of UFOs. His lifelong fascination with this phenomena underscored his gravitating toward all things science fiction and TV shows like The Twilight Zone and The Outer Limits. Doug went on to apply the things he learned in a variety of disciplines. He attended trade school for auto mechanics, welding, and autobody. Around high school age, he began to play ice hockey, and still does to this day. After seeing The Doors in concert in 1970, oh, I am so jealous about that, he began studying piano and classical music, eventually writing 18 pieces of original music. His band, East Agony, played in several venues around the metropolitan area, including the famous CBGB's location on the Bowery in New York City. Transferred auto mechanic skills to piano tuner technology as a career, so as to be around the piano, and began studying classical piano privately at Juilliard School in New York City, part of the Lincoln Center complex, and maybe the greatest music school in America. Well, definitely in America. Following a visit to the Salvador Dali Museum in Cleveland, Ohio, he was inspired to begin painting. Primarily self-taught, Doug pursued art and painting, eventually taking continuing ed courses at the Art Students League and the School of Visual Arts, where I am proud to have taught in the School of Continuing Education, both in New York City and Surrealist painting led him to the photorealism school, with auto mechanics and tools as a subject. In 1993, he began a series of surreal celebrity portraits and was awarded Absolute Vodka Artist of the Year as a result. Numerous TV appearances followed on Entertainment Tonight, MTV, Inside New Jersey, Channel 13. This led to a series of paintings on the topic of religion and uniform, depicting nuns and priests and the illusion of our exterior appearances. This, in turn, led him to what I consider his most challenging work, a 3-year art project entitled State of Grace, consisting of large-scale portraits of adolescent burn survivors. It was featured in the New York Times in 2006 and on German television as well. His Burn Survivor series brought him into the burn survivor community in a way very few outsiders have ever experienced. Among other things, Doug was a guest on at the Art of Recovery, the 33rd annual event for the regional burn centers, where he displayed several works at the Philadelphia Museum. Doug and burn survivor volunteer Jelani Jeffrey were guest speakers at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York City in the fall of 2007. Doug was given a one-man show at the Barry Center Art Galleries at Ramapo College in Mahwah, New Jersey. This was followed by an oral presentation to the student body by Doug and burn survivor Jelani Jeffrey. After witnessing a UFO, Doug began his involvement in photography and night vision filming of UFOs. This led to his becoming heavily involved with those of us in the UFO community. This led to his creating 100 oil-painted portraits of whistleblowers, mainly in the UFO and Black Ops area. In 2017, Doug again followed his intuition, creating a Broadway-level stage musical, HYPNOTTA, to bring the UFO and paranormal topic to the legitimate stage. The word hypnotica came to him as he woke from sleep one morning. Doug created the entire story, characters, and composed and performed all the music demos over a 7-year period, inspired by real-life events. All the work on the musical was completed late last year. Doug's work has been featured on CBS television, Entertainment Tonight, and his paintings have been the subject of many one-man shows at university museums and private galleries. His art website is Doug Auld, that's AULD, DougAuld.com. His UFO website, DougAuld.com/UFO, and the musical website is hypnotica.com, and that's spelled HYPNOTT, and I pronounced it wrong again, HYPNOTTA.com. Doug Auld, welcome back to Meanwhile Here on Earth.
Hey, Peter, thanks very much for that introduction. In fact, as I'm listening to it, I'm saying, oh, who is that guy he's going to have on? Because it can't be me.
Who goes from welding to hockey to piano tuning to painting to Broadway musicals? Nobody. Only one person on the planet, and you are him. Let's just jump right into it, Doug. How ever did you make the transition from gallery artist, fine arts painter, to becoming a musician and a playwright?
Well, it's amazing when I listen to it, because there's certainly no way it could be plotted or planned out. It's really just being in the moment of and letting things unravel, and little by little things just kind of one thing led to another. So I guess we could go back to the roots of my interest in nature and mechanics as a kid.
Yeah.
And being a tinkerer and a person that loved to take things apart, put them back together again, driving my mother crazy. Every now and then I'd fix something. You know, my father was a car dealer. And so it was looking like I'm moving along towards, you know, being a mechanic and taking over the dealership someday. And, you know, all that to follow. And it was moving along on that course till I was in Bergen Technical High School studying mechanics, and my brother called me up and said, we're going to go see a concert, a band. And I'm like, oh, okay, where are we going? And he said, well, I'm going to pick you up on Friday, so have a change of clothes. We're going to go see the Doors. And I'm like, okay. And I think I heard something about them, but I didn't really know too much about them. And I said, all right, let's go. And we went. And I would say that was the, you know, unplanned dividing moment between my course going one way to another. And I don't think my dad was too thrilled with the fact that following the Doors concert, all my conversation was about, you know, what we saw. And I eventually went out and I bought a Farfisa organ, which is what Ray Manzarek of the Doors used,
Oh my gosh.
and started tinkering around on it. And there's a little bit of an advantage to not knowing what you don't know. And so, since I didn't know how hard it was to play or not to play, you just start playing around. And my neighbor next door played the organ, and one thing led to another, and I started tinkering around with music. And my brother Greg, who was quite an influence on me, being the older brother, I have two younger sisters. Greg would always kind of do something first and kind of break the ice with my parents, like, oh my God. And then I would like, draft like a stock car behind the other car. I would slipstream behind him and start doing it. And he already took the heat for it. So I could kind of get through it a little bit. And we eventually formed that band. And we were just so unbelievably inspired and driven from a source I cannot even explain to you where it came from. But we were convinced that we should be doing what we were doing and that we had great material. And we were so convinced that my brother Greg wrote the Doors manager, Bill Siddons, a letter and told Bill Siddons about us. And he actually answered the letter, and he said, we sent him a demo or two. And we didn't have a guitar. We were very Doors oriented. So since they were heavily keyboard,
Yes.
Even though Robbie Krieger of the Doors played the guitar, but we were all piano, bass, drums, and my brother is a singer. And I learned to play the piano bass with my left hand. So I would play the bass the way Ray did, and I would play the keyboard with the right hand. And monkey see, monkey do. I emulated it as best I could, and we got the band going. And my drummer friend Bob was, of all crazy things, a piano mover. So figure that out. We had a truck, and I took a old white baby grand piano. I refinished it, and I put electric pickups throughout the whole soundboard.
Good Lord.
So I could mix the bass, the treble, mid-range, and the treble together in this pickup system. We electrified the piano, and we went out and we played with our band with that piano electrified. Bob and I would load it in the truck. And I remember when we headed over to CBGB's, and Hilly Crystal, the guy who ran the place, was having a fit that we came in with a grand piano.
Oh,
and
jeez.
He's like, it was on its side. And he's like, what are you guys doing? You're ruining my club. You're and on and on and on. Anyway, we had a crazy night. We played, and that was our birth in New York City at CBGB's with our band. And I was at the time of, I think, Tough Darts and Talking Heads and bands like that were coming through.
That's right.
And, yeah. So
I saw a number of them there. Again, making the transition from painter to musician, I came to painting in exactly the opposite way that you did. My grandparents were taking me to the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Museum of Modern Art from before I could remember, which is a wonderful thing to do with kids anyway, get them to museums as soon as you can. And then, shining in my little high school classes, studying art in university, going to the School of Visual Arts, starting to teach there, showing at the galleries, a deep appreciation of art history, where for you, it just, like music, all of a sudden it was there and you were making it up as you were going along.
Yeah, Peter, I'm not like an academic or a school kind of trained person. I'm dyslexic, and they didn't diagnose dyslexia then, right?
That's right. We didn't even have the word then.
No. So, but I knew that I was quite behind the eight ball when it came to reading. And in Catholic grammar school, I went to Annunciation Grammar School, and the nuns were not too pleased with me there, and I didn't do too well with reading. And I felt, I will say that to some degree it scarred me, because there was another child like me and he got yelled at and screamed at by the teachers that he's going to be a nobody and a loser. And I absorbed that into myself too. And to be honest with you, I actually never told anyone this really. I think it's the first time I've ever said this on a live forum. I kind of shunned tests, and I shunned learning. And I didn't want to learn if it had to do with getting grades, because if it had to do with getting grades, I already felt that I was going to fail. So I avoided it. I avoided things like that. And I found that just being by myself in my room was a safe place for me to create things and do things. And that's how I became, and we kind of jumped past the painting, because just to explain to your audience, I was beginning painting also while I was beginning the piano. So they were both going at the same time. My brother again took me to the Salvador Dali Museum. So two influences. He takes me to see the Doors, and then he takes me to see Salvador Dali. And I'm looking at the paintings, and I had the same effect as the Doors. I'm like, I got to do this. This is like, the hell with auto mechanics. This is great, great stuff. I mean, what imaginative things. I just stared at these paintings. So I started painting roughly at the same time I started playing the piano, but I shelved music back then in favor of art. And the reason why I did that was, and you would know this, Peter, and all musicians out there would know this, that dealing with bands and band members and moving equipment, and now I'm at the mercy of my drummer showing up.
That's right.
My brother not having a fit or something, whatever it was. Whereas I could just paint by myself, and I could produce a finished product in front of me, and I could go, hey, Mom, hey, Dad, hey, John, look at this. And I controlled it. So that's why I favored painting.
The reality of collaboration, as in being in a band, versus the solitary art activity of painting or writing, if you will, or composing, is the difference between night and day. When collaborative art works, there's nothing like it. The closest I ever got to where you were in that were the years that I essentially was attached at the hip to my sister as her musical career took off and skyrocketed. And then toward the end of it, being a band manager and dealing with people being late for rehearsals and all of the stuff that goes with that. Personally, though, I grew up also being brought to the theater and to the musical theater, fell in love with the stuff, did my high school plays, but the reality, also as a dyslexic, I was never browbeaten for it, but I just grew up knowing I was quote unquote bad at math, and I damn well better work the things that I was good at, which was painting, drawing, singing, and ultimately theater. And not as an actor, but in terms of management, working in off-Broadway repertory theater, watching these incredible performing artists work together and the sets being built and running the theater. It was heaven. But that both of these things happened at once, and not knowing that you couldn't paint, or, how do you create this effect or this color, rather than studying it from books, learning it in school like I did, you just figured it out. And that in itself, for me, again, coming up on the same track as developing your musical skills is pretty special, even if you broke your father's heart by not becoming a car dealer.
Well, I will say this, that in the end, my father was never more proud.
Yeah.
I think the proudest day my father ever had was when the New York Times did a 2-page spread on my burn survivor series.
Oh my God.
2-page, open like this. And my father, because my father was always up against, he was a Depression era kid, worked his tail off. You know the story. He went to school at night, worked in the day.
My dad too. Same.
Same. We're from the same cut on this. And my father at the car dealership all the salesmen and people that work for him were probably thinking, spoiled kid, Doug Auld, his father, he doesn't do anything but sit on his butt, and whatever the assessment was.
He could have had a real secure future here.
Yeah, and when my father had that New York Times on his desk at his job, opened it up, and manager and salespeople and customers would come in. It sort of was the vindication. The New York Times was the stamp of success and approval to my dad that you arrived. If you're in that newspaper, you're doing something right.
That's right.
And that happened. And that was one of the great things that alleviated any kind of, my father really started to, I'm not going to say only then. My dad was a great man, but he really started to value that I'm on a course that's worth supporting and worth pursuing.
Doug, as we got to know each other better years ago, and I began to see more and more of your work, it began, of course, with the whistleblower series, but I was completely unprepared for the burn survivor series, as I think a lot of people would be. In terms of damage and perception to ourselves, of ourselves and others, to see somebody disfigured, I think there's almost a basic human hardwired instinct of, gee, I'm glad that's not me. And if it's really extreme, that it's very difficult to be around somebody who is living with, that level of damage. And not only did you not look away, but then took it one step further and said, I am going to capture these images with the respectful permission of the people involved. Wait, I'm going to take it one step further and allow myself to become involved in their world, and take it one step further. I'm going to take their world and bring it into the non-burn victim world, and give regular folks who have not suffered this kind of catastrophe a chance to get a sense of who these people are. They're just like us, but not on the surface. Can you talk a bit about that transition?
Sure. Well, I've always been, regardless of the style of work I've done, I've always been a representational or realist painter, without a doubt. Even my surrealism was a combination of realistic imagery. So now we can tie ice hockey into this. I'm playing ice hockey one day with firemen and cops,
easy competitors,
and little old Doug. And, these guys were like monsters, but I asked this friend of mine now, Brian Green. I said, Brian, he was the fire chief in Hoboken. I said, where would I find burn survivors? And he's like, what do you want to find burn survivors for? I said, well, I have an art project idea I'd like to do. And he said, look, contact a woman named Kathy Conlon at St. Barnabas Burn Center in New Jersey, Livingston. And I did, and I wrote her a letter, and I pitched a little bit of what I was doing, and we went back and forth, and they weren't very responsive off the bat, but who can blame them?
Yeah.
And
what's this guy's real angle? Is he some weirdo?
Yeah, exactly. And then, I think once I sent them some paintings that I've already did and showed them my skill level.
Yes.
They weren't interested in like a paint by number guy. They would like to know that I had some skill level. I think that raised the bar for them, and they invited me in, and I went in and I pitched the entire idea, and they went along with it, and they said they would get 10 volunteers from their burn unit. And I requested adolescents, and I requested that for a reason. And a lot of this, of course, Peter, is instinctual. I'm a very intuitive person.
Yes.
And I go by guts and my gut feeling, and it's how I am. So I thought I wanted to take what was the most impactful person, what where they had lost the most in this devastating situation, which is a kid or an adolescent. If you and I are burned today, well, we had a full life, and you've established yourself as a person. I have too. But if you're severely burned at 12 years old and you've yet to form love relationships and intimacy and all the rest of the stuff, you're in the worst peer pressure group you could ever imagine. And I never knew this until I met these people, that I learned that 10% of all facially burned people do not return to public life. Oh no, shall I say, only 10% return to public life. 90% of facially burned people have shunned coming back out. So I'm thinking, and I mentioned to you earlier that a lot of my moral character came from Twilight Zone and The Outer Limits. I mean, I was a kid who spent so much time watching those shows, and Rod Serling wrote about social injustice. He wrote about
he was the best in so many respects,
and he wrote about social issues, but he cloaked them in science fiction. He found a way to get the story out, whether it was race or whether it was greed or whatever
he sure did.
Our human conditions were. He expressed it in the Twilight Zone episodes, and I learned a lot from that. I learned a lot from The Outer Limits about moral compass and do the right thing and so on.
Yes.
So when I started this project, that's how I got it going. And then I got a list of people. I told them what I wanted to do, and Kathy Conlon and Roy Bond at the hospital decided they'll do like a personal in-house study of how the burn survivors react to their portraits. And I would do the paintings, and they would do that. And when they were all done, they'd get together, and we'd get together and share the images and talk about it and so on. But I mean, I'm flying blind here, and I absolutely did not have a single dollar in my mind that would come from this. I mean, it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to make millions on these burn survivors. That's the last thing in the world I would ever think of. And I got to know them all, and they are great, great, amazing people. It's why I titled the series State of Grace. Yes. And I felt that the individuals were in some state of grace. They knew something at a young age, far beyond myself and most average people. They just knew something.
Doug, let me jump in for a moment and ask you, these 10 core people that you met and painted, they were all young burn survivors.
Yes, pretty much. Not all the same age, but all young.
Right. And all from different socioeconomic backgrounds, or basically, middle class, working class?
Well, that's one of the things you ended up discovering. And I can't really say that I know that this has changed since then, but it came from lower socioeconomic circumstances, poor wiring in homes, parents that are not home, locked key children, things that are, lack of supervision, not in all cases, but in general, that's where it came from. And not Jelani, but Alvaro. Alvaro was burned in the Seton Hall dorm fire, the very well-known Seton Hall fire that happened many, many years ago. And he was just caught in the dormitory and couldn't get out.
God.
And he was so severely burned, they gave him a 3% chance of survival. They sewed his eyes shut, put him into a drug-induced coma for 6 weeks, something like that, while they rehabilitated. And it's gruesome work. And this is time to mention the nurses and doctors that work in the burn are,
yes, of course,
heroic people. But anyway, not to get too overly deep on that, he was a volunteer, and Alvaro was the greatest guy in the world. He loved basketball, and he would play basketball outside and shoot hoops when I would come over, now that he was older and had recovered. But but his portrait was quite impactful. It's, of course, on my site. All my burn survivor portraits are on my website, dougauld.com, which we can speak about later. But absolutely incredible people that they were so inspirational. They became my friends, and it was hard at first. Like I'll recall when I first saw Shayla. Shayla is over my shoulder in the background, the young girl looking at you, who is a 14-year-old girl. I don't know how clear that painting shows to people, but again, they're all on my website. And when I went to her house at first, and I pulled up, like it was like Edison, New Jersey, or somewhere South Jersey, and I remember pulling up into this neighborhood, and I remember getting out of the car and looking at the front door, and I saw this little hand like this with no fingers, just like this little wave to me at the door in this face, and I immediately put my head back in the car and started crying my eyes out, and I said, "All right, Doug, how are you going to do this? How are you going to get in the house and keep a semblance of yourself and go through this interview and photo shoot and discussion with her mom and whoever else was in the family?" And it was hard. And a lot of them were very hard. And I started to get a little bit more used to it. But it was a very challenging thing to face this topic. So, I went in. Unless you want to say something, Peter, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Number one, in the English language, one of the great catchphrases is, "I can only imagine." And, we use it in many appropriate moments where we're learning about something that we've never experienced, or in moments where something catastrophic has happened. But there are things that it doesn't apply to. I could say or think, as you're talking about Shayla, I can only imagine what it would be like to be burned. And like you, I have a good imagination, but you know what? I can't imagine it.
Yeah.
I have no idea of how to even begin imagining it. First, going through the trauma, the terror of being caught in a fire. Second, perceiving that your life is over as you knew it.
Yeah.
For good and forever.
Very
Nothing is coming back the same, and nothing will be better. And that your body, whatever relationship you had with it, and your face are now irrevocably changed for the worst. Then, if you're lucky enough, if that's the word, fortunate enough to survive that catastrophic kind of damage, because of course, our pores are fused. What physiologically goes on, and the reality of skin grafts, it's painful off the chart. It goes on for months and months and months, if not years. There are multiple surgeries always involved, and you're in there somewhere. And, just thinking about the 90% of people that go through something like this, and specifically, I get it, your face. I'll say right here that I grew up with a story in my family in the 1890s. My grandmother, who was about 10 years old at the time, was making soup at the stove and bent over, and the pot handle got caught in her apron, and it spilled the scalding soup all over her back. And it was, as children, when we learned to cook, one of the first things we learned was never leave the pot handle out, always turn it to the side. And she was in the hospital for a year, and it's vaporized into time, but we had a little article, a column article from the New York Times from a year later, that little Rosie Lowy is being released from the hospital. And when I would stay over, we all, kids knew this, my sisters and I, but, she'd wear a nightgown, but if, at a certain angle, you could see patchwork, like a checkerboard of, transplanted skin. I think she was the first person to undergo this process, or one of the first. And all leading up to the question of, why wouldn't I want to return to society? Well, it might have a lot to do with yet one more time of seeing somebody reacting to the way I look. Do I need to keep doing this to them? Do I need to keep doing this to myself? Better to, find an institution or stay with my family. Am I closing in on some of the reality around that, or is there something I'm not getting about wanting to self-isolate after a trauma like that?
Yeah, Peter, all of the above. And one of the main reasons why I took this project on, and people may be wondering, well, why did I even bother to do this? Is that I had seen it. I don't want to go over the whole story, but a lot when I was a lot younger, in my early 20s, I was at a food mart for coffee and donuts, and I had seen a very severely burned girl with her mother at the time, a very young girl, and it made such a horrific impression on me. And I was not very adept at reaction time from her, and I just stared at her, and she stared at me. And instead of my normal "Hi, good morning, how are you?" I didn't say a word. I walked away, she walked away, and there was.
A
So
moment you'll always a moment you'll always remember, and she
I
may be as
carried
well.
that all the way through. I saw one other burned person on the island off of Belize. That was one other time at a bar, and I was like, oh, there's like, I remember saying, wow, it's like 10 years that I've never seen another burned person, and now I see another one. Now, obviously, you see people in wheelchairs, you see amputees, but you don't see burned people.
Good point.
So then 9/11 happened, and I was down near the water's edge, and I was having coffee, and I was on my rollerblades because I used to rollerblade through town, and someone stuck their head out of the coffee shop and said, oh, I heard a plane hit the World Trade Center. And I went, what? And I was like 3 blocks away. I rolled down to the water's edge, and I saw, from that moment on, for the rest of the day till late in the afternoon, I was a witness to the buildings
Oh my
collapsing.
God.
A good friend, Kevin Cleary, passed away in the building, a friend of mine, and other friends of mine, and many Hobokenites passed away in the building, many fire people.
Yeah.
And I remember coming home, Peter, and I remember laying on my bed and looking up at my ceiling fan spinning around. And I just asked the heavens a question. I went, what are you doing with your life, Doug? What are you taking a stand on? What are you doing? You're making paintings of this, and then you're making paintings of that, and and I said, what are you doing? And when I asked that question, immediately that young burn survivor from 20 years ago popped into my head.
I'll be darned.
And that's what decided it for me. I said, okay. It was like an answer. I said, okay. I pondered that from there on, and I said, I'm going to take on painting highly realistic portraits of burn survivors so that people could stare at the paintings, not the people. So if we could put these in institutions and galleries and have a show, put them up on the net, art has a way of diffusing and altering our perception of what we're looking at, of course. And so whereas photographs are very graphic, but they're also mechanical.
Yes.
A painting comes through me, my sensibilities, my arm, my brush onto that canvas. And even if you think you don't see brush strokes, or even if you think you don't see decisions, you're seeing a decision with every brush stroke. And Peter, you would know that as a painter, that my insides came out into these paintings. And one of the things that most everybody says when they see these paintings is, first of all, they're beautiful. And second of all, their eyes. Doug, there's something in these people's eyes that you captured in the brush. And I just have to say, it shakes me up a little bit when I talk about them. Because I have to say that there was some other force in me that guided me through this work. And so lo and behold, I had 10 or 12 portraits that I finished. I also painted a woman named Maha, who was lit on fire by her father in Germany. He doused her with gasoline as she came home, struck a match, lit her on fire because he didn't like the guy she was dating. And I painted her German television. Germany knew about the New York Times article and contacted me and asked me, would I paint Maha? And would I then come to Germany and be put on German television with Maha and her painting, which I did. So the works got out there, and I believe they made an impact. And of course, nobody in the audience, myself, you, Peter, could ever know the impact we have in the world. You can only be yourself and put out who you are, because you can never know. I mean, I can say this, that I saw a change in painting in subsequent years of far more mastectomy paintings, far more amputee paintings, deformity paintings. And could I say that maybe I had something to do with that? I'd like to think that I did. And I'd like to think that I helped the evolution of our acceptance. You know, going back to Velázquez, when he painted the dwarfs and little people with the book open.
That's right.
Remember these paintings that, of little people at the time? Yes. Velázquez wanted to bring nobility to a little person. He didn't want the person to be connected to being a court jester or a silly.
Very famous series.
Yeah. So, and that made an impression on me also. So this kind of stuff I carried up through the years, and that's how the State of Grace series happened.
Do you remain in contact, even irregularly, with any of the subjects of your portraits at this point?
Absolutely. There's a woman named Louise Brown Macaluso. Louise was, her and her sister from Haiti were burned in a house fire in Haiti, where the bottom part of the house went on fire, but those people never let the people upstairs know the house was on fire.
Oh my God.
And they were so severely burned. Louise was so severely burned. To this day, oddly enough, she lives in my town. She lives in Hoboken. She has a podcast. She's got a MFA. She's a brilliant woman. She's gone through school. She's achieved the things she's wanted to achieve in psychology, and we're friends. I help her out. She calls me. She calls me her earth angel, because whenever she's in trouble, she needs an air conditioner put in, taken out of the building. When she needs meds picked up from CVS, I'll often jump in the car, run down there and get them and just drop them off for her, because she lost a leg in the fire. She lost an arm in the fire. She's got no fingers on one hand. She's got a prosthetic hand. And but when you see her finally doll herself up to go out with her hair across her face and these big glasses and so on, she's stylish. But I got to tell you, she's been in and out of surgery all her life. And there's a plain and simple fact that every one of us knows. Everyone wants to look as good as they can.
Of course.
Everybody.
Yeah.
No matter what you look like, no matter how beautiful you are. And it's always relative, because you could have a stunningly beautiful guy or girl, and she'll say, oh, I can't stand my nose. Or he'll say, hate my eyebrows, or whatever it is. We all have a proportional criticism of ourselves. And look at the plastic surgery industry, and look at selfies, and look at what goes on in our cell phone world today.
Yeah. You've nailed it. Again, transitions for me are fascinating. I have this whole show in great part was premised on how we become the people we are. And you are one of the great living examples of transformation on top of transformation, each one coming with, I think, a new layer of knowledge, appreciation, sensitivity, and maybe most important, empathy. That connection we all have with each other, that in this crazy world, we're encouraged to create walls between people that are not like us. what you do is particularly important, and it's one of the reasons I wanted you to return to the show. Um, how UFOs came into your life, um, and the impact of the great science fiction. We were lucky enough to grow up with movies like Godzilla, Forbidden Planet, The Day the Earth Stood Still, The Invasion of the Body Snatchers. When did you first become aware of the subject of UFOs, flying saucers, extraterrestrial possibilities? And when did you first have an experience of seeing what might have been a truly anomalous UFO, UAP?
Well, knowing my age, and I was born in the early 50s, 1953, Peter, without a doubt, we got the greatest science fiction films ever made. And now I know every generation is going to argue with me, but truthfully, we did. And so Godzilla came out in 1956. I was 3 years old. I probably saw it already at 3, right when it came out, because my mom's method of taking care of her kids, and she was a terrific mother, was give them a box of cookies and let them sit in front of the television. So it's not advocated for everybody today, but that's how I was raised.
Well, television was also a very different world then.
Very different, very different. You know, so we would watch $1 Million Movie. And,
Yay!
oh my God. And it was the greatest show because my brother Greg and I would always laugh that they would say, if you missed Rodan and want to see it again, it starts in 2 hours. And so
we have to take a moment and explain to folks who did not grow up in the greater New York area.
Right.
$1 Million Movie was a remarkable institution. Maybe it was WPIX.
WOR, I think it was.
WOR, one of our local channels that we grew up with, of the 3 or 4. And what their simple genius was, let's show the same movie every day, several times a day, all week, through the weekend. So if you didn't see it the first time, and it was often a real classic, and if it was a film that you, especially as a kid, that you loved, if time allowed, you could see it repeatedly.
Yeah.
I think the first film actor I was a real fan of, that I was aware this is a movie actor, and I love what they're doing, and I'm enjoying this, was probably by the time I was 7, and it was James Cagney.
Right.
And the movie was Yankee Doodle Dandy, one of the most jingoistic, innocent, pro-American nationalistic films about a guy that I later learned was not the most pleasant person in the world and pretty anti-Semitic. Not that that was uncommon at the time.
Right.
But I couldn't believe what this guy was doing on stage and the energy he was putting out. There's one point where he's recreating part of a Broadway show that Cohan wrote and starred in, and he dances up a wall like Donald O'Connor does in Singing in the Rain. And I remember after I'd watched the movie, I'd go up to my room and repeatedly fall on my ass trying to dance up the side of a wall. But yes, $1 Million Movie was great. Yeah. And Rodan and all those wonderful movies showed on it in great style.
It would be pretty funny, Peter, because my brother Greg and I would be watching, let's say, Godzilla on Saturday. So we'd be watching Godzilla, and my mother's like, okay, the boys are happy. They're in front of the TV. And then 1 o'clock would come around again, and we'd start watching it again. My mom would be like, what are you guys watching? Are you watching that same movie? Like, no, it's a new film came on.
About another monster, Mom.
Yeah, and it would be Godzilla again, and sometimes we would watch it 3 times. We could not get enough. So now let me make a mention of I think his name is Akira Ifukube. He is the composer of the original score of Godzilla. Ooh. And I am so and so now all the music that came from these great films and shows that my father would play in the house when we were kids, like he would play Camelot and West Side Story and Carousel. And all these great shows, and Pavarotti and opera and Turandot and, Puccini arias. And although we were running around going, Dad, get that crap off, Cream, we want to put Cream on or something. That music made its way into my subconscious. And it's that grand music, the movie music. and the show music, that is what is in my heart today. So that's what inspired my new show, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But those movies, Godzilla and everything, because we're going to touch on the UFOs, how the UFOs started.
Yeah.
I would say that there was a show called Lost in Space, and that was like this crazy little show that was like
Sure.
sort of
A lot of folks remember that one.
Yeah, innocent, with Robbie the robot. But when I think to this day, I would have to say that Forbidden Planet could be my all-time favorite.
Well, it's a masterpiece.
It's a masterpiece because of monsters of the monsters of the subconscious. Can you imagine that the Krell were so advanced in the movie? They were so advanced that they could teleport by telekinesis. They could teleport, but what they never considered was in their sleep time, their monsters of the subconscious could also teleport.
Yeah.
And I was like, what a crazy, brilliant idea that was. And anyway, all things flying saucers, all things outer space. And I just think a natural calling and wonder of what are we doing here? I mean, this little planet, and I look up at night and there's billions of stars. What are they? And what are we doing here? And that was always in me from a kid on up.
Yeah.
And so the ET equation began in me very young.
Yes. Yes. I just want to add one thing about Forbidden Planet, which starred the great character actor, British actor Walter Pidgeon, and the romantic lead before he became beloved, world famous for being a comic actor, was Leslie Nielsen. And of course, Robbie the robot, who was one of our favorite robots growing up. Also, the film, and this is all, of course, pre-digital 1950s, the paintings that created the backdrops and the deep space into infinity of the interior of the planet and that kind of thing. Also, it didn't hurt that it was based on Shakespeare's The Tempest, so it had that extra depth in terms of plot. I actually got to see that film once on the large screen when there was still a small, wonderful revival theater in McMinnville, Oregon, and as first years of their UFO festival and conference, they would show films there, and then the theater unfortunately closed. But to see that film in full Technicolor was very special. We have about 4 minutes or less before we go to break. When did you first see a UFO?
I was with my brother Greg, and we were at the front in the yard. Now, I can't really say that I remember seeing it, but this has always bothered me. My brother Greg saw something in the sky. It was sitting low. He said, "Doug, get out here, get out here. There's a UFO in the sky. Got to see this." And I don't want to get woo-woo on anybody, but I don't remember my whereabouts. I can't remember, was I in the kitchen? Where was I? Somehow I don't remember it. But that was the first time that my brother Greg said that we collectively saw it, although I don't remember seeing it. But if we jump forward, I started to, I got involved with the UFO community. I went to see Chris Bledsoe and stayed with his family when I heard his story told. We're gonna speak about Nancy Tremaine and her story, because that ties into HYPNOTTA, my show. But I started to just look up, and I remember I'd carry a camera with me everywhere. And I started to, in the daytime, I started to stare at the sky, look at the sky. Everyone was like, "Who's this guy with the bent head back all the time?" And it was, and I started to realize, and this has always been a good question that I've always had. When I'm looking, am I creating them through consciousness, or am I actually seeing them? Am I catching them? Or am I part and parcel of the creator of them? The jury is still out on that for me. But then again, I've had other people witness them with me. So I guess to say, I started looking up, I started carrying a camera, and now I own night vision equipment. And I've taken a lot of night vision films of odd things in the sky that don't make any sense. So I do have daytime sightings documented on my website. And I have some night vision stuff that I can't show, but but I have in my possession.
Is there anything you want to close with? We have a minute before we go to break for this first hour of the show.
I would say that I've been very fortunate to carry a bucket along of everything that I've ever done. And one pours into the other and pours into the other and pours into the other. Everything has informed the next stage. So as a kid, catching turtles and frogs and snakes and pollywogs and everything nature, they all made their way into my surrealist portraits. Fish and birds making famous faces. And everything I've done, it's just everything has contributed. My auto mechanics, my ability to tune and rebuild pianos comes into my music and my music writing. And it's just like, and I could never have planned it. It's just like dominoes, that one thing led to another. And I would say that I've been fortunate to be able to string those things along. And most of it has been hands-on. It's not been academic. You know?
And a perfect place to end our first hour. This is Peter Robbins. The show is Meanwhile Here on Earth with my special guest, a dear friend, Doug Auld. We'll be back in a few minutes.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
Are we alone in the universe? The most important question facing humanity is on the verge of being settled once and for all. The Mutual UFO Network has been at the forefront of this journey for nearly 50 years. Our members worldwide are dedicated to the research, documentation, and awareness that will shape the future of humanity. Won't you join us?
Discover the Observation Deck, a one-of-a-kind virtual event platform that takes video conferencing to the next level by using avatars to navigate a campus. There's so many areas and activities to choose from. There's a 1,000-seat auditorium, an expo hall, a nightclub, and even a beach. So come attend a conference, take a class, or hear a lecture on the incredible Observation Deck campus. Go to theobservationdk.com.
You're listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network. We provide unparalleled coverage of trending news in the world of ufology, cryptozoology, and paranormal phenomenon. Whether you're watching our video live stream or listening to one of our audio programs, you are getting the best from world-renowned researchers and hosts, guiding you through topics the mainstream won't touch. Miss one of your favorite programs? No problem. Head over to the members area at kgradb.com for access to our massive library of award-winning content. Make contact, stay connected. Only at kgradb.com.
And we're back. Meanwhile, here on Earth, host Peter Robbins, guest Doug Auld. If you're enjoying this show and are a listener to other shows on KGRA, or might want to try them out, please consider becoming a subscriber. You can do it by the month or by the year. And if you use my name, PETER, as your subscription code, you will receive a full 30% off. There are literally thousands of shows in their archive I've got so many great colleagues here as hosts. Give it a try. Even, just run it for a month and see what you think of it. Back to you, Doug. Your Broadway, it is a Broadway level musical, and it is pronounced HYPNOTTA. HYPNOTTA. And again, the word itself, obviously the root word being hypnosis, kind of came to you coming out of sleep. Did the word come first, or the desire to, where the hell did you come off deciding you were going to write and, score a Broadway level musical?
Yeah, again, it was a strange convergence of impulses. I would say that sounds like a good title for a song. I got to jot that down. I woke up. I remember it was like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and I just sat up in bed and I said HYPNOTTA, and I went, hello? Was that said to me? Did I say it? Was it given to me? Did it come through me? How did I say a word that I never heard before? Now, I thought about it, and it made enough of an impression on me to write it down. And because I had an early morning ice hockey game, I was going to run out of the house, play ice hockey, and normally I would forget everything about myself when I play ice hockey and come home. I would never remember. And I'm like, oh yeah, HYPNOTTA. I started thinking about it. Now, I guess that it was at the time when I was also starting to write some free songs, like free opens songs. And whenever I would write a song and I would send them to my brother and sister, my sister Doretta in Florida, and my other sister, and I would ask opinions. My son, Brian, wonderful. I'm blessed with a wonderful son, Brian, who just got married in Scotland and just returned.
I love the pictures from the wedding.
Yeah, thank you. Whenever I would write a song, everybody would be like, oh, that's Broadway, man. That doesn't sound like a pop song, or, you're never going to get that on the radio. And I'd be like, why? I mean, gee, everything I would write, I guess, was rooted in a classical kind of, chordal manner. Certainly not jazzy, certainly not dissonant like that, but a more of a classical quality songwriting. And so I'm writing those songs as the HYPNOTTA event happens to me while I'm sleeping. And I'm well aware of Nikola Tesla, the great scientist who
millennial genius.
Yeah, who all he had to do, I remember reading about him, he said all he had to do was dream his inventions.
That's right.
And then he could make them in his waking time.
To a tolerance of a 500th of an inch without any schematics.
So now we're returning to the idea of where did that come from? So where did he get that? He's obviously, I know we use the word downloading or channeling, but he's obviously getting that from somewhere. And I thought maybe that's why I'm getting this idea from. And I started to meditate on it, and I started to think, much like the way the Burn Survivor series came to me, I started to say, how can I take some things that are of dear importance in my life and put them together? And I thought UFOs, ufology. I had been getting to know you. I've been getting to know Grant Cameron, a great friend and a dear man that I've always loved. Grant, I've been starting to get to know these people. I remember seeing the History Channel had something called UFOs Over Earth or something. And Chris Bledsoe came on. This is many years ago. And I was so amazed with this. And I said, I got to go see him, and called him up, and he invited me to their house, and he welcomed me in. Yeah. And I stayed with them for several days. But I think that what happened was I said, all right, I could take my love of writing music, and I could take my interest in ufology. And then I thought, well, I know what I could do. I could offer a soft disclosure of sorts to a stage audience, not a film audience, because a film audience was already being handled by Fire in the Sky and
huge
Steven Spielberg and every other film you could think of, E.T. and Close Encounters.
Documentary films.
Document. It was a ton of stuff. But I was thinking to myself, well, I've never really seen this topic handled on, imagine a Broadway show about ufology, and how would that be tied in? And I always thought that the UFO community was always sort of preaching to the choir, because all the people in ufology that come to the shows and come to the events are pretty much already in the gang.
The great majority.
The great majority are believers, and sometimes you bring some new people in, and as we're creeping up into the day today, where this is no longer a laughing matter on a newscast, and the days of constant ridicule, and that everyone was always ridiculed if you brought it up. George Knapp would talk about things like that and so on, about the giggles, oh, ufology, everybody giggling. So we've got government involved, we've got NASA involved, we got fighter pilots talking about things.
Yes.
Real or not, sort of is irrelevant to me, and I'll explain why in a second. But I thought, all right, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to write a show, a stage musical. I'm going to compose the music, I'm going to compose the lyrics, I'm going to tell my story, and I'm going to deliver the topic of UFOs to a tourist or a Broadway audience, not the preaching to the choir thing. And much the way It's a Wonderful Life with Jimmy Stewart made an impression on me.
Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons why It's a Wonderful Life is a great example is because, and I talked to a theater person about this today, they didn't name it Clarence the Angel Comes to Hollywood or something. They named it It's a Wonderful Life. No UFOs, no angel in the title, nothing alienating to an audience that doesn't believe in angels.
That's right.
No religious connotations.
Yeah.
They named it It's a Wonderful Life. And then you got brought into the story. And essentially, it's very much similar to what we're talking about right now. I mean, here is a paranormal event. A man wants to kill himself. He throws himself in a river, and an angel rescues him and shows him what his life would be without him being there.
What everybody else's life would be if he hadn't been born.
Yes. How?
Even I mean, you may have a similar memory. God bless Frank Capra's memory. A wonderful filmmaker, great American, and not a very good businessman. He did not renew the copyright work on his own film. It went into the public domain, which means anybody can show it without paying royalties. One of the reasons it's become so popular. And that as a kid, seeing it early on, and that idea, even thinking about it, the hair on my arms is going up. What would the world have been like if you had never been born? What a concept, what a thought. And coming right out of that, how much better or worse the world is because you were born. It allows you to dream very big. And I, as somebody who is a theater person and has worked in theater and loves theater, I've seen at least manuscripts, scripts, librettos for at least half a dozen full-length stage treatments on this subject one way or the other. They've all been well-meaning. None of them, except for one, has been terribly successful. And that one by another dear friend and a great playwright, Marty Martin, who is in Texas now, called Top Secret Magic. Contrasting, going back to the summer 47 and taking us back and forth between Washington, D.C. and Roswell, New Mexico, and armed with a great deal of knowledge and creativity. And it's so well written, it functions very well as a radio play as well. But what you've done here, number one, is intentionally aim at a non-UFO related crowd, obviously in the hope that people interested in the subject will see it as well. Structured it so that it's accessible in all respects to all ages, so to say. There's nothing, X-rated or, overly intellectual about it.
No.
And taken on the challenge of how can we bring this to a stage where you're going to get a different audience. Obviously, there are people who don't go to the theater, It's just not part of the way they were brought up. Maybe they'll see, a regional play or a kids play at the high school. Legitimate theater becomes more and more expensive. But let's go right on to you describing the synopsis of the show, which I read with great interest.
I don't have the synopsis in front of me.
Well, guess who does? May I have the honor?
Go ahead and read it. Yes.
Okay.
And then Peter, I think we should play the video of one of the songs. We have two videos, and then we have a cut called Obfuscation, which I'll talk about, which was inspired by my intelligence officer friend in the DC area. Okay.
I don't think anybody has ever written a song quite with this theme.
No.
So here goes. In 1945, the United States detonated the world's first nuclear bomb at White Sands, New Mexico, sending a powerful electromagnetic pulse out into space. Did this event serve notice throughout the universe that the kids found the matches? In 1948, the alleged UFO event at Roswell, it was actually 47, happened, and the world was awakened to this fascinating reality. HYPNOTTA is a fictional adventure based on several true-life documented UFO events. It follows the lives of two main characters, Nectar and Jilly, who have been best friends since grade school when they witnessed a UFO at school. As they grew into adulthood, they remained true to their story, withstanding bullying and ridicule. To compound matters, Nectar also claims to have seen a tiger in her backyard in their small town outside of Detroit, furthering her reputation as a fibber and storyteller. Years later, Nectar is empowered to start her own paranormal radio talk show in an effort to build consensus and get answers. Jilly, always by her side, is not as confident and slowly deteriorates from alcohol abuse. Nectar's Native American grandmother, Sage Whitehawk, is the only one who believes her, but Sage moves out west and Nectar loses her support. Nectar always remembers what her grandmother taught her about the HYPNOTTA, the ability to communicate with the spirit world on the edge of waking and dream state. Government agents Randolph and Bryant arrive in an attempt to thwart Nectar's event through obfuscation. Their job is to prevent this information from getting out to an unprepared public. Under increasing duress, Nectar decides to travel out west to find Grandma Sage. Other characters include Ruth and Saul, Nectar's parents, Father Douglas, the parish priest, Seth, the regression therapist, Mac Jacobs, a private investigator, and Vaughn, Nectar's lost love. 18 original songs accompany the dialogue. HYPNOTTA tells the extraordinary, enlightening, and inspiring story with moments of drama, tragedy, and ample humor. The characters strive to remain true to themselves, always against odds and adversity. The audience comes along on this entertaining journey, re-examining beliefs, biases, and limitations in their own mind. Hell of a script. So, let us go to our this is the first thing we want to look at is the audio or video.
Why don't you show the video called Even Einstein Struggled?
Here it goes.
All right. And this is...
Even Einstein struggled to solve this puzzle, having a knack for numbers and math, brilliantly brilliant, always on the right path. His hair all puffy, his world went fuzzy. A knock on the door, now enter Niels Bohr, with new calculations and a little bit more. His new sensation, his new equation. Nothing is certain, be it sky or the ground. Reality's fuzzy till we see what we found. All is entangled and thought was profound. That's my Einstein struggle. All is explained with science and math, not in the belief of a deity's wrath. You're quite mistaken. You'll soon be shaken. Ways of the old give ways to the new. Open your mind and let it seep through. Your theory's grating. No, it's liberating.
Doug, you are undoubtedly the only lyricist in history who will ever be remembered for rhyming the word door with the great physicist Niels Bohr. Congratulations on that alone.
Yes, let's document that well. Of course, that is a partial song. The middle section was taken out, but we don't have enough time to play full songs here. So that is one of the moments where the regression therapist meets the Catholic priest. I was raised Catholic, of course. Father Douglas is I'm taking his name, and it's really, Peter, the debate I heard growing up at the table. You know, my mother with Holy Roller Catholicism and me saying, "Come on, Mom," you know, it probably wasn't like that, and like, you know, I was playing Mr. You know, counterpoint, and my father would be like, "Would you two stop it?" And like, so this was going on at my table. And so in a way, when I look at HYPNOTTA, and I look a lot of it, it's really very much about my life too. So you don't realize it while you're writing it, but you're writing your own story, you know. So yes. But that's the debate, and the great debate about what is real. What is real? We're now we have quantum physics that shows there are no particles. There is no, it's not a materialist world the way we believed it is. And we've gotten down to vibrations and you know, so good vibrations is really where we're at. So.
Do you want to go on to the next video clip at this point, or hold that for a bit?
Yeah, no, let me talk about that for a second. So
please.
Let me mention Nancy Tremaine
for
a second, okay? And then we'll go into that. So I met Nancy Tremaine. I can't even put my finger on the years. I don't know, 4 years ago, 3, 4, or 5 years ago. Somehow we met each other. And I will say now that Nancy's story, which is riveting. I mean, and she's stuck with this story for 60 some odd years.
Yeah.
Not cashing in the bucks or anything like that. She's going through a real tough time now. Who I just spoke to her the other day. She's in very, very bad condition with her apartment, with mold, with bed bugs, with you name it. She's going through a nightmare. Anybody that's had bed bugs knows that's the worst thing in the world. But anyway, Nancy, I decided to anchor my main characters around Nancy and her real life friend, Cindy. Nancy and Cindy witnessed a UFO outside of Detroit. Cindy became an alcoholic, and Cindy drank herself to death. And that was a great loss for Nancy. Nancy held on. The story is phenomenal, and you can find out enough about Nancy Tremaine if you look her up, and you'll hear her whole story. But Nancy, I decided, you know, what I wanted was to take 2 or 3 credited as real UFO events, be they real or not, told as real. Because whether it's Chris Bledsoe or Travis Walton or McMinnville sighting or this one or that one, there are UFOs. We know them to be documented. So whether this one's proven wrong and that one's proven right was not necessarily my issue. I wanted to create this show, and I wanted to pattern my main characters, Nancy and Cindy. My main characters, Nectar and Jilly, after Nancy and Cindy. So Nectar would take Nancy Tremaine's part, and Jilly would take Cindy's part, who passed away. And spoiler alert, that happens in my show. Jilly drinks herself to death, and it's a very traumatic scene. And there's a very traumatic song. We're not going to play it, but there's probably the most powerfully touching song is called it's not what you it's called Jilly Ascending, and it's Jilly's spirit as she rises out of the body. Maybe we'll have her up on wires with the white outfit or something.
Yep.
The body will be like this. She rises up, and the spirit sings the song to Cindy to Nectar, as Nectar is holding her on the floor. And it's a story. It's an NDE. It's an out of body experience, and so we hear from the afterlife in the sense that she describes. Death is not what you think. It's great. I'm liberated. I'm free. I'm freeing myself from this entanglement, this material entanglement that we all take as being so real, but it's really just an illusion. So, but anyway, what we're going to play now is. At the end of the first act, the way I have my show set up, there is and the beginning of my act, shall I say, there's a regression of Jilly. Jilly is
hypnotic regression.
Yeah, right. So Seth, the scientist, who we just heard, he was coming from the regression. He regresses Jilly on the couch at their house, and she goes into her story. Her story is what happened to her when she was up in the UFO craft with Nancy. And so, again, we're going to play this, and it's only a partial. It's kind of the culmination at the end, okay?
Got it. Here we go.
It's called Rolling on Back.
Remembering when you're rolling on back, like a train on a track on a hill that's ascending, rolling on back. Space, rocking and rolling back to a time we just can't erase. I'm seeing it now, such strangeness, elongated eyes covering teardrop faces. Nectar is there as I float up above. Then they sent me back down, put me back on the ground. Without Nectar, who wouldn't be found? Till daybreak.
Very powerful. And I'm guessing the only song ever written about hypnotic regression, certainly that I'm aware of.
I don't know. That's a good question. And there's actually a second one. At the end of the first act, Nectar's regression happens, and that's when the audience actually sees the UFO event. I don't show the UFO event in the beginning of the show. I thought about doing that, but I'm holding it off to the end of the first act. And that's when the culmination of the UFO event happens, and they're at school. And so, Peter, and a lot of your listeners will know this, Nancy Tremaine and her friend Cindy are the inspiration for my two main characters. And the Ariel school sighting is my inspiration for for them seeing the UFO at school. So I'm not I'm not following in any religious manner any of these
Yeah.
stories. I'm just taking and appropriating the spirit of the aerial school sighting. 63 school children in Zimbabwe who witnessed, which is an absolutely remarkable event that, of course, Dr. John E. Mack went out and studied. Try to get 63 school children to draw the same thing and lie about it. It's not easy.
And then as adults back up their stories.
Yeah, to this day. So that's where Rolling on Back, that's where, and that's where the original sighting happens when they're 9 or 10 years old at school, and then they're regressed in their early 20s. So there's a 10 or 12 year period between them as kids and them as adults in the show.
A technical question, because the nature of creativity is self-invention, and you have a challenge. A more conventional way to look at it might be as a painter. How do I resolve this area in the upper right to come in and, be the best aspect of this composition? And you figure it out. When you get to the point where you're going to retell the story of their actual sighting abduction, now with stagecraft being what it is, there are so many technological ways of creating illusion as opposed to, just in an analog way with props and that kind of thing. Have you given much thought to how you're going to stage that?
Well, of course, I'm going to be entering the world of teamwork, which for the first time in my life, I'm going to be doing. All that music that everybody's just listened to, I've played just on the piano. The drums, the strings, the orchestra, the tubas, you name it. I mean, thank God I live in a day where I could do this all here. Otherwise, I'd have to have Boston Pop's orchestra in my house. But it's amazing that I could do that. And it's all created off the keyboard. And then I've had some wonderful Broadway singers, several of them. The two singers that you just heard in Rolling on Back, one was in Wicked on Broadway.
Oh my!
And so I've gotten some good people to come in and do some demos for me, and some local people too, to get all 18 songs done. As far as the way I want to produce this is Doug, coming from Doug, not thinking moneymaker. I really think we're overdone with special effects in our life right now. I think kids are saturated. I don't think anybody can fit any more of a microsecond of data into the visuals that people are seeing right now. I mean, my son 5 years ago showed me a movie called Ready Player One that I'm still shaking my head. Steven Spielberg made it. I don't know how they did it. And yet, Peter, I'm seeing kids yawning. Like, well, what else you got for me? So I think we have a problem with oversaturation, and I'd rather see this return more to a
simple,
more like the way The Lion King, or like puppetry, and like
let the imagination do more work than the technical aspects.
We don't really let lighting be dark, and have a silver thing in the background where the beings got out of, and like little people dressed in like dark or whatever with the eyes. Whatever it is, do it to leave imagination in people's
old school.
That's what I'd really like to do. I mean, I know that we could do great special effects, but so what? And so can everybody. And it's on every movie. And again, we're oversaturated with it. We want to. It's almost like bringing back radio to
Yes.
radio show to it. So
as you're speaking, Doug, I'm remembering as a child, I saw a New York production geared for children of Peter Pan, and as an adult, 2010, I was in Suffolk, England, staying with dear friends there with my family, and they surprised us and my family's last night before they went back to the States. They took us to the theater, an old theater in Ipswich, for a performance of Peter Pan as well, a pantomime, not the way we use the word. A panto is a wonderful form of theater, innately British. not germane here. But in both cases, there comes that moment when Tinkerbell is dying. And the way that it was depicted was with a light, a pinpoint spot that got weaker and weaker. And then, if you believe in fairies, applaud, and got stronger and stronger. And I remember sitting in the theater as an adult thinking back to that experience as a child and that incredibly simple effect. Your imagination jumps in and takes hold of it and runs with it. And for me, just simply a powerful memory of an effect in the theater that needed nothing more than that to leave indelible memories for life.
It says volumes, without a doubt, Peter. And the irony is that I study NDEs now, near-death experiences. I study hundreds of them, and there's the pinpoint of light, and then they go into the light. People go into the light, and so it's funny that may end up being the more realistic depiction than all the special effects that people are doing. But again, I'm making comment on the idea that the songs are traditional. They're not jazzy. They're not rap. They're not hip hop. They're not anything that I would consider current. They're just songs. They're songs that I wrote that I feel are appropriate to the lyrics that I wrote, to the story that I'm trying to tell. And this is how I want to present it. So, and now the song Obfuscation, which is kind of a funny thing here, because
yes,
my friends in the DC area, who are in intelligence in one of the agencies, said this word, and it struck me in such a way. I don't know that he ever thought I was actually going to write a song about it, but he used the word obfuscation in a video that he had on. He used the word on a YouTube channel that was taken down, but I heard it once. I heard it. Somebody had asked him a question, and he answered with the word obfuscation. And I thought about it, and I thought, I'm going to write a song about my two characters, Agent Randolph and Agent Bryant. My two characters, which represents my CIA characters who come around and try to obfuscate Nectar and Jilly's story. Yes. They want to ruin it, and we have the audio for it. My friend Pat Bull, who was in Mamma Mia, sings it. And so we'll go with obfuscation. So I think Chanel is saying that we have it, and I don't know if you want to play it.
Yep, Chanel, would you play obfuscation for us?
To do obfuscation.
Can you put it up?
Obfuscation. Think it easy what I do, spreading that which isn't true. Well, even I need a good vacation. You speak the truth, and I say you're wrong. You make your case, and I create scorn. The truth that you tout, I marinate in doubt, sowing seeds of little lies and casting them about. This career that I chose, why? Well, only God could know, is obfuscation. Obfuscation. Never wake or toss about never wrestle with any doubt, for I believe I'm protecting this nation. You want the truth at any price. I say you're wrong, so take my advice. The world's a better place when we control the human race. No need to contemplate. Can we now commiserate? The truth at any price. I say you're wrong, so take my advice. The world's a better place when we control the human race. No need to contemplate. Can we now commiserate? Yes, I know it angers you, but I've got a job to do. For I believe I'm protecting this nation.
Uniquely creative.
And so the audience can picture there's a song and dance routine. There's like a little hunt with a gun and then a turnaround, and they're like, so it's going to have some choreography. It's going to have a little bit of whimsy and fun. And I have one other song that the agents sing. And I think it's probably one of the only times somebody in ufology actually goes to bat for their side of the story, because I don't know what they're told. I don't know what their job is. I'm not there. I haven't been put in that position. We know the Brookings Institute report from years ago that suggested,
1961.
Yep, Peter, you would know better than anybody, suggested don't let this out. We have intelligence agencies that have a job to do. And it doesn't mean that I agree. It doesn't mean that you agree. But to be honest with you, I don't know what their job is.
That's right.
And so I go to bat for them to some degree, that they are there and they have they have a purpose. And I may not understand that purpose because I don't know the multiple layers of what's really being dealt with. I don't know.
You know, it occurs to me, one of the great ironies of taking on this project and doing it the way that you have is you have taken the future, in a sense, a vision of where we're going, the whole concept of disclosure, of our not being alone, of open-mindedness versus closed-mindedness, and you have put it into, and I mean this in the very best sense of the word, a traditional, classic Broadway musical format that, you know, if the words were different, it could be Oklahoma or Carousel. It could be, West Side Story, or it could be The Sound of Music. The form is classic. The subject matter and material is radical.
Very true. And one of the things that is going to have to be decided on, of course, money makes the mayor go, as we all know.
And a lot of money.
And will somebody put up money? Will somebody produce and direct this and make this happen? I'd be happy with a small off-Broadway fringe theater to get it going. And in fact, to get a little bit of a cult following, the kind of thing where you can't get a ticket for it because there's only 125 seats.
That's right.
You know? And it's sold out for a month or two. I'd love that. I do think it's on time. In fact, I started it 7 years ago, and I think it was ahead of its time.
Your timing is superb in that sense. And I think you're thinking very realistically. And of course, the history of the American theater is filled with, well, it certainly has its share of the kind of examples that you're talking about. One of the best known being the legendary musical play, The Fantastics, which opened in Greenwich Village in whatever year, in I think the early 60s, and stayed in previews for like 40 years. And ran out of that same small off-Broadway theater for all that time and became one of the most famous musicals for people that love musical theater. I hope that, number one, obviously, I hope that this is fully realized, that it is picked up and produced professionally, whether it's a major scale project or a good off-Broadway or regional theater project. And if anybody is watching us and listening who knows people that work in the theater and that might be interested in taking a good look at this possibility, please let me know. And I will be happy to get that information to Doug. Segueing somewhat right now back to your very unique, again, classical series of portraits on a non-standard subject is your whistleblower series. In the way that painters often think, if you're going to take on a series, and for me, anything beyond 2 paintings qualifies, starting with triptychs, very famous series of paintings undertaken by everybody from Monet to Andy Warhol and on down the pantheon of paintings that are interrelated and have, in many cases, the same format. Each one of these is an oil painting and fairly modest scale. What is the size of the square again?
They're all 9 by 12. And I thought, all right, let's see. I didn't want to do a few. I didn't want to make them as large as the burn survivors. I'd still be on that project. And, and I wanted to make all of them as one work, under one heading of one work. So I would not sell 1, I would not sell 5, I would not sell 17, I would only sell 100. Or I wouldn't sell them at all. And at the moment, and Stephen Bassett, by the way, our mutual friend Stephen Bassett told me many years ago, he said, Doug, don't sell this. He said, the day is coming where this is going to be so valuable. Just don't. And I don't really do much creativity with a dollar sign in mind. I'm happy if a dollar follows me.
Of course.
We all need money. And I've been actually fortunate enough to sell paintings for a lot of money in my lifetime, which is remarkable, thinking of how many painters never sold anything in the past.
You bet.
Seurat and Van Gogh come to mind right away. But so I painted 100 whistleblowers as one work.
Yeah.
And even with the 100, Peter, as you know, and you and I have discussed, I couldn't include everybody. There's hundreds of amazing people.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why I took on whistleblowers is because, the cynicism that people have about people like this without understanding what they've gone through.
Oh my gosh.
There can't be anything worse. There's no reward. You ruin your career. You ruin your family. You're ostracized from your this and that, from your job, any number of things. You're called a quack and a nut and a this and that. And what do you get in return? Really? Not much of anything.
Well, sometimes even worse than not much of anything. And maybe one of the best, if not the best depiction, a Hollywood depiction, but very well done and quite accurate of what whistleblowers' fates can be and what they go through, is that powerhouse of a film called Silkwood. If you have not seen Silkwood, see it without going into the details of the film. Also, you remind me, in 19 1962, I believe it was, the Leo Castelli Gallery premiered the work of a new artist, legendary downtown story, Leo's first assistant, Ivan Karp, who the
Right.
year before had discovered Roy Lichtenstein, give him his first show. On that same kind of period of time, also visited another artist, and they were only ready to take one new major player on at that time, who just didn't seem quite as grounded or could be counted on to produce regularly. But they went back to him the next year, and they gave Andy Warhol his first show.
Yeah.
And it was, of course, the legendary Soup Can series that Mr. and Mrs., non-appreciating of some of the great ironies and humors of modern art completely saw as a sham, but very tongue-in-cheek. Every type of Campbell's soup, whatever how many there were shown together.
Right.
And what Castelli asked for was $500 each. I mean, imagine if you could go back in time and score one of those babies and, buy your estate in southern New Jersey. They didn't sell a single one. And as history plays out, and as Warhol became such a major influence in the world of modern art, and of course the Andy Warhol Institute was established in his hometown of Pittsburgh, ultimately they were able to acquire them all. And that's where they are. And I would like to think at some point in the future that we may not see, or at least from our corporeal form, is that whistleblower series in the National Gallery or in the Smithsonian, all together just the way they should be.
Wow. Thank you. I was with Shayla. Shayla won a portrait competition and was in the National Portrait Gallery at the Smithsonian.
Wow.
For a summer. And I was told by the curator at the time that it's the first burn survivor portrait to ever hang in the National Portrait Gallery. So I have that dubious distinction of getting a portrait in the museum for half a year.
There's nothing dubious about that distinction, my friend.
Yes.
You have been shown at the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. That's, for most painters, a dream that simply doesn't realize. We're going to take a look at two of these portraits.
The whistleblowers, yes.
Yeah, both by people I knew, one very well and a dear friend who we lost 2004, Dr. John Mack here, and wonderfully rendered. I just think it's wonderful that you kept them in very human scale format. Also, 9x12 is such it's a number we grow up with in terms of standardization of images.
This series of work was a departure from my higher realism. It's representational, but
Yeah.
I really wanted the audience to see the paint stroke.
It's much more painterly.
Very painterly. The color palette, the palette of colors and everything wanders, and you got flecks of cools and warms and a little sparkle of blue up in the top of his hair. Yeah, and little accents here and there, and gestures of paint marks that make the image of John E. Mack.
And I'm just going to say this here right now because through social networking, I've made a number of friends who are not painters, but are starting to paint. The same way that we have friends who are not writers, but are starting to write, and not photographers, but taking increasingly memorable photographs. Take a good look at this. You can see the paint. You can see what Doug's done. Nothing is upfused. Nothing is hidden. Every brushstroke stands on its own. And you should, I mean, again, make a note and let me just bring it up. In fact, Doug, you've got 3 websites. One, first of all, for your paintings. And which one is that?
All right. So the DougAuld.com has my entire history of painting with the whistleblowers, the burn survivors, the surrealistic images, all the different works that I've done over many years, and some random paintings, and drawings and pastels and things. So you go to DougAuld.com and you'll see all the series of work. Then you have DougAuld.com, put a / and UFO at the end of DougAuld.com, and you'll see the 7 or 8 or 10 images. I think, Peter, you actually had a photo of them, but we don't have to show it, of some of my daytime sightings that are objects. They're not the most traditional type of UFOs like a flying saucer or something, but they still, I've pondered them for a long time and I can't figure out what they are. and then my musical HYPNOTTA.com, HYPNOTTA.com. You can see the story. You can listen to 5 songs. There's a blog there. All 18 songs are not available. They're available upon request, but 5 demos are there on the site, and that's how you can hear the music. And again, I'm going to need teamwork. I don't know much about what it takes to put on a Broadway show. I do know it takes a ton of money.
It does, and extraordinary teamwork. Also, again, my point there was visit DougAuld.com, because you'll not only see this series, you will see a wide range of the work that Doug has done across the years. And I think, like some of the greatest artists in history, one of the things that makes Picasso is he got bored doing what he was doing and went on to create something else. You look at his paintings as a teenager, and you see this perfect mannered 19th century realism going back to 18th century sensibilities. And of course, it explodes into the world of modernism. Visit this site. My point being, if you have thought about painting and just want to try it out, do it. Do it. Absolutely give it a shot. Doug, believe it or not, we are coming to the end of our own missing time experience. We have blown through 2 hours.
Wow.
To quote Arnold Schwarzenegger, or paraphrase him at least, you will be back. I miss you, my brother. I look forward to our next get together, and just want our viewers to know that next week our guests are going to be, again, 2 by chance dear friends of mine, and remarkable people in their own right. Documentary filmmaker Jennifer Stein, who is responsible as executive producer and director of the multiple award-winning extraordinary UFO documentary, Travis, the True Story of Travis Walton, 5 years in the making. Also, a dear friend and colleague, Bob Terrio. Bob was a cameraman and returned repeatedly for 5 years to Arizona with Jennifer to make this film a reality. Also, both of them were kind enough to be my executive producers and tech people and camera people on my documentary on the life and death of James Forrestal. If you have enjoyed this show, please tell your friends. Again, Doug, a true pleasure. And thank you so much for being who you are and sharing everything that you have with us. Good luck, especially with this musical, and just keep us posted on how it's going. Stay well, stand up for what you believe in, and be kind to each other. We'll see you next week.
Gonna try. Thank you very much for having me on. See you.